We're back with another classics album, and we're talking about a band that is my all-time favorite band, and we're talking about an album that I feel like gets overlooked quite a bit because I'm not 100% sure. Yeah, let's just dive into it. Trespass by Genesis. So, Genesis doesn't really need too much of an introduction. Forefathers of progressive rock. They came on the scene pretty early alongside with Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, Yes, Pink Floyd, Jethro Tull, all the big ones. They're the band that got me into progressive rock. I saw the tribute band, the musical Box, play Selling England by the Pound tour, and it changed my life. You know, right then and there. I've talked about how it has literally changed my life, so let's talk about one of the albums that really did start it all. And I feel like Trespass does get overlooked a little bit. Like, it doesn't have those big staple songs from progressive rock like Return of the Giant Hogweed or the musical Box or Fountain of Semelix from Nursery Crime, or, you know, the staple of Supper's Ready, Get 'Em Out by Friday, or Watcher of the Skies from Foxtrot that came afterwards. It also doesn't have that really famous Genesis lineup. You know, Steve Hackett and Phil Collins aren't with the band yet. Instead, you have John Mayhew on drums, and you have Anthony Phillips on lead guitars. Anthony Phillips would later on go on to produce some really fantastic solo work, and part of the reason why he had to leave the band was his kind of crippling stage fright and anxiety about playing live, especially when Genesis was getting more and more live gigs and bigger, you know, audiences. He was like, I don't know if I can do this. And John Mayhew, I honestly don't know. I think he just kind of got lost to time. If you know what happened to him, let me know by commenting down below, because I honestly don't know. We have such a leap in terms of progression within the songwriting ship and the song styles on here. The first album from Genesis, released the previous year in 1969, of From Genesis to Revelation, really was just kind of the Brit pop, very contemporary pop music of the time, very similar to what like Pink Floyd or Deep Purple was doing with their first album or two, where it was just kind of very fun, you know, not too challenging, I don't know, very accessible in terms of songwriting ship. Nothing too out of the ordinary. Very traditional in terms of the rock music and not being too hard or too challenging. Well, that can't be said once we come into Trespass, because Trespass essentially kind of rewrote the book for Genesis at this time, and even starting with the first track of Looking for Someone, with Peter Gabriel's stark and piercing vocals with Looking for Someone, like just kind of piercing the night air and bringing the song into a crescendo. And I mean, the smallest song on here is Dusk at 4 minutes and 13 seconds. Looking for Someone at 7 minutes. You know, we are in 1970, so we've got about a year under our belt in terms of, you know, having longer stretches of music on a progressive rock style. But like, in terms of composition, you know, they were really bringing forth this symphonic approach to music, something that Yes at this point was flirting with pretty heavily. So it's coming into the forefront with Looking for Someone and the big crescendos on here. What I really love is the dynamics between Peter Gabriel's voice, Anthony Phillips' acoustic and minstrel guitar work, blended with Tony Banks' piano work. And like the three of them really playing very well. And then rooted into there is the rhythm styles from Michael Rutherford. And John Mayhew is doing some really good things in terms of the drumming work. Unfortunately, he's no, you know, Phil Collins, but he does a really great and serviceable job on there. So all the boys are really coming together to create something really fascinating. I also love how somber and dark a lot of this music is, especially within atmosphere and setting of tones. This is definitely found within White Mountain, having these overlays of soundscapes. Again, very dark, but in a whimsical aspect. I don't know, for some reason I'm picturing like Lord of the Rings in that case, like going through some of the Mirkwood forests and deep woods with lots of like fog and ambient sounds. Really enjoying that. And I also love the like storytelling aspect of this album as well, especially within White Mountain. Really interesting in like weaving a tale, and it does again showcase Peter Gabriel's like storytelling talent and how he's able to weave together this narrative flow. And if we want to look at the brilliance of the constructing of sounds and constructing and orchestrating of music, one of my favorite tracks on this album that I feel gets overlooked is Visions of Angels. One of my favorite Genesis tracks. I love the build. I love the crescendo that we have on here. This big down, down. Like, this really goes to showcase John Mayhew's like drumming style on here. It's very punchy, very poignant, very tight and gripping. I love the big crescendo moments where we have the blendings of the piano works and the vocal works with Peter Gabriel and everybody else, because everybody has a backing vocal tribute on this album, bringing together such beautiful and layered harmonies on this. It's one of the crescendos that I feel really painted the groundwork for some of the things that Yes would be doing on Tales of Topographic Oceans, in being so rich and lush and beautiful without needing all these big, powerful guitars that unfortunately Steve Hackett would lean pretty heavily on once he came into the fold in later albums. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, I'm just saying it's a different kind of expression, and when you are limiting yourself to not relying on those techniques, you are forced to experiment and try different things. Then we come into probably the second more famous track on here, Stagnation. And I love the lyrical content. I love how gripping and heavy-handed this one is, especially when we get into that ha, 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 said I want to sit down, I need a drink. You know, and it's just so gripping. It's so tangible. This is where we move a little bit from the big orchestration, big symphonic moments to very powerful, very hard-hitting music. And Dusk is fine, you know, it's a good kind of cleansing of the palette that we need between the big track of Stagnation into Dusk. And then the closing suite, the one track that I think we all know from this album, The Knife. This is the one that kind of put them onto the stage, and the one that they would play much later on in their live shows. I think they've kind of done away with it in the 80s and 90s, but definitely into the 70s, they would continuously play this as a closing suite. And I love how gripping, how hard-hitting. This is the most heavy track that they have on this whole album. It's fast-paced, it's gripping, and I love how at the end we basically get this big war march that uses the rhythm sections from the Holt's Planet Suites of Mars, where it's this dun 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 dun, and on top of that we have Tony Banks's keyboards, and this just, it puts down the groundwork for what Tony Banks will then build his career off of, with providing such a lush and brilliant overlays of the keyboards with this do 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 do. Like, this is kind of the proto Supper's Ready, or the proto musical box. You know, this is what we are going to be expecting from the band later on. This is just like a little bit of a nugget to what the band is going to be doing later on. Yeah, this is a brilliant and beautiful album. It's a little bit more subdued and a little bit more intimate when you compare it to much of the later albums within the catalog. And a lot of that has to really be showcased for Anthony Phillips and Anthony Phillips' personality. You know, he's a lot more intimate. He's a lot more somber. He's a lot more on creating atmospheres with the guitar work, rather than just kind of, and again, I'm just doing this as a comparison because I love Steve Hackett. He's one of my favorite guitarists, but I feel like Steve Hackett is much more of a very blow down the doors, very big, very powerful, very like soaring guitar works, very like poignant, where Anthony Phillips is a lot more of a subtle touch, a lot more presenting of atmosphere. And this album really showcases that kind of essence. So I freaking love this album, and when you compare it to the album that came before it, from Genesis to Revelation, the jump in quality and the jump of difference, it's astounding. It's breathtaking. So yeah, that's kind of all I've got for Trespass. It's a brilliant album, and as I mentioned, I think it gets overlooked unfairly just based on how good the albums coming forward are. And I think that because of that, it does get overshadowed just a hair. And I don't think that's warranted, because I think this has some of the most dynamic, most interesting, and also most intimate tracks that Genesis has ever written. So that's about it from Genesis's Trespass. What did you guys think about this album? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever you thought, please let me know by commenting down below. And that's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for watching. I've been having a blast looking at some of these earlier albums from bands, or I guess some of these classic albums, shining the spotlight on albums that we all know and love. So yeah, if you haven't heard Trespass for now, or you haven't heard it in a hot minute, give it a spin. You know, you might be more rewarded than you think you will be. So that's all I've got for you guys today. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.